Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we have had so much fun trying out all of the features like Q&As and polls that let us be really creative and engage with our audience. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome back to Podcast Royal. I'm Jessica, and Rachel and I are coming at you today with a surprise Friday bonus episode. We recently had Christopher Andersen back on the podcast for a second time, and we interviewed him on his new book, The King, the Life of Charles III. I hope you enjoy it. Check it out.
Just when we thought we'd read everything there was to read and knew everything there was to know about King Charles III, veteran royal biographer, and I think we were just talking about this a moment ago, our very first ever second time guest on Podcast Royal, Christopher Andersen, swoops in with his latest, The King, the Life of Charles III, which is out today, November 8th, as we record this. This book is revelatory, compelling, and the first full-length conversation we've had about the king since he took the throne on September 8th, which was actually 2 months ago today, now that I say that date out loud. Christopher, welcome to the show, our very first ever member of the Second Timers Club.
Well, thank you. I am honored. Do I get a blazer or something?
Well, that's like, I know where you're going. That's SNL, Saturday Night Live. And I think that's the Five Timers Club. So you got
Okay.
three more books to go. So that'll make it
God.
an even 40 books for you.
Well, I'll start writing now.
I love it. Well, we're so glad you're here. Oh my gosh, this book is so juicy, so good. So I want to start with perhaps a question maybe that you haven't been asked yet. We'll see. This to me was one of the most powerful lines of the book. You write that a nagging question to Charles was always, will they love me like they loved her? I don't know why that line just stabbed me in the heart, referring to, of course, the adoration people felt for his mother, Queen Elizabeth, which, of course, she is such a tough act to follow, and his first wife, Princess Diana. Will they love me like they loved her? How has this question plagued the king's life?
The childhood of this man is just it's heartbreaking. If you look at the way he was raised, the way he was isolated, really, I mean, people see or remember the last few years when the Queen had an affectionate relationship with Charles, and there was a warmth there, but that was not their relationship for almost his entire life. I mean, from the very young age, one little episode sums it up, and I think that is when he was 4 years old, and when Charles was 4 years old, and his mother went off to on her first tour of the Commonwealth for 6 months, and she came back, gets off the ship, and he runs up to greet her, and she pushes him aside, and not now, darling. And then when he finally gets his time with her, she reaches down and kind of robotically shakes his hand. I mean, newsreels of that show that she's treating him like a 45-year-old man. Charles always said his mother was aloof, cold. His father was bullying and actually reduced him to tears on an almost daily basis throughout his young life. He only spent 15-minute sessions with his parents growing up. He had a 9 o'clock session and a 6 o'clock session. The nannies brought him in for 15 minutes, and that was it. So of course you'd end up feeling abandoned emotionally. I think if your parents treated you that way, they sent him off to school, or he was basically physically and emotionally tortured. At Gordonston, this Scottish boarding school, begging to come home and writing tearful letters and breaking down constantly. Parents said no. So when you go into adulthood with that kind of emotional damage, baggage, yeah, you're going to wonder why people love you or if they love you.
Yeah.
Well,
Dr. Anderson speaking there.
Well said.
to go off on that, the king is described in the book as being the loneliest human being on earth. Can
Mhm.
you explain that for us?
Well, right, exactly. I mean, and I think that he felt he's always been looking for love. The British have a word called they call a person who complains constantly a whinger, which is their version of whiner. And the one thing Camilla has done throughout their relationship is to always kind of center him. I think he feels that she's one person that he can lean on and trust to tell him the truth. But let's face it, I think in his kind of search for himself, he caused a lot of chaos in his marriage to Diana, and he really, because he insisted on this relationship with his mistress Camilla, really brought the monarchy to its knees. Now, at one point, now of course, fast forwarding to Diana's death, I mean, he kind of rescued it then, but no, I think he in essence, he really is a solitary figure, but that makes him interesting. I mean, the queen, you knew who she was. She knew who she was. She was not a complicated person. It was all duty and country and the position she was born into. Charles is very different. He's had to wait 70 years for this job, and in the course of that 70 years, he's kind of shaped his own destiny to a greater extent, I think. And that's why I think the thing I like about him is that he's not, I mean, yes, the Queen's had a fascinating life, but he's always been there too for those 70 years that she reigned.
Mhm.
And through, we've seen the scandals and the tragedies and the great moments as well. So, in essence, he's provided a lot of the drama in the royal story.
That is one way to put it. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So I'm wondering, from the unique vantage point of being his biographer, how do you think his first 2 months on the throne have gone? Has anything surprised you?
Well, no. I mean, he is, well, I think in the first few moments, we got a look at his flashes of temper, which I write about in the book. He really has a phenomenal temper. I write about the time that he, lost a cufflink, it went down the drain, and he pulled the sink right off the wall. Another time when
Right.
he tried to strangle his valet, about chase the valet into a closet, through a chair, through a window, because the window was stuck and he couldn't get it open, and that was at someone else's house. Uh, well, here we go to the moment he becomes king, and everyone saw it when he sat down to sign those papers a few weeks ago in Scotland, and the aide hadn't cleared the desk quickly enough, and he just had a little hissy fit there that everyone saw. I mean, he really has to get, he has to, if you can't control your temper when the world is the entire planet is watching, you have a problem. So that was one thing I thought was fascinating, among many.
Interesting.
Mm.
Well, what was an anecdote or two that made your jaw drop about the king during your research of the book?
Well, the book was the 5 years in the making, and in essence, I completed the bulk of it a while back, and then I've been updating it, as you know, constantly,
Right.
and including all of the turmoil with Harry and William and whatnot. One of the bombshells in the book, though, is uh, really how Camilla has become queen. I mean, we have a situation. Well, just a little context here for those who don't remember that. The queen. I mean, Camilla, when Diana died, Camilla became the most hated woman in the realm, if not the world. Everyone
Mhm.
blamed her for Diana's death, in essence. And she basically went into hiding. It took 8 years after Diana's death for Charles to convince his mother to let him marry Camilla. They had to get down on their knees in front of the Archbishop of Canterbury, if you recall, during that ceremony at Windsor, and say, they apologize for their wanton and wicked ways. Um, but he said that he would never make Camilla queen. That was one way he kind of bought the approval of the public. she would be princess consort. I knew from the get-go that that was not, he would had no intention of keeping that promise. But as recently as, oh gosh, less than a year ago, he said she will never be queen. She's going to be the princess consort. He's sticking to it. Well, along comes in earlier this year, the Prince Andrew Epstein affair, and he needs money to pay for his civil settlement in that sex abuse scandal, and the Queen is willing to pay it. But Charles uh, has always been opposed to the Crown getting involved in Andrew's personal problems. The Queen's favorite child was Andrew, always. Uh, and there was a kind of an unspoken quid pro quo in which Charles remained silent. The Queen was allowed to pay, um, the $14 million settlement, or a big chunk of it, and she issued a statement, not so coincidentally, that she finally backed Camilla as the future queen consort. Um, I think it's one thing to say that's going to happen, and it's quite another thing to watch that crown being placed on her head during coronation on May 6th. I think it's going to rub people the wrong way, and he's
Yeah.
going to have a crisis. He's going to have a crisis on his hands, at least of public support, because the polls have, even after the Queen issued her statement, and Camilla was, her popularity shot up from 14% to a little less than 50, I think, and now it's starting to sink again because the Queen's no longer around uh, to issue any kind of support for Camilla. So we'll see what happens, but I think Camilla is going to be his first big problem to deal with. That, and of course, before that, he'll have to deal with Harry's book, which is coming out early next year as well.
Yeah, he's got a 1-2 punch. Well, actually a 1-2-3 punch of The Crown season 5, which comes out tomorrow as we record this. Then he's
Yeah.
got the book, then he's got the docu-series, and all of this before the coronation. And that's only up until January. Who knows what's going to happen from January to May? And I really don't think we can understate what you just said. That unspoken deal between Her Late Majesty and Charles to give Camilla her queen consort title. That is a bombshell piece of
It is.
information.
Mhm.
And because you've said this in other interviews that I've read you've had since you've been doing publicity for this book. That statement kind of came out of nowhere. It was unprompted and unprecedented, and actually was the weekend of the 70th anniversary of her taking the throne. And I
Exactly.
remember being stunned by that, but now it makes a lot of sense on the back end.
Right. If February 6th was the day, was that she made the announcement. You're right. It was the technically the 70th anniversary. It's the anniversary of her father's death, so it's the anniversary of her becoming queen. Completely out of the blue, Harry and William were blindsided by this. For some reason, they actually believed their father when he said he'd, out of respect for their mother, Camilla would never be queen. And by the way, they're already working behind the scenes on removing the consort from everything. So it would just, and she will be Queen Camilla. I mean, in the future, that is what her title will be. And Camilla is a very complicated person. All she ever wanted to be, as you both well know, was the king's mistress. She never intended to be queen, I don't think.
Yeah.
And that sort of fell in her lap. So I think she's going to be shaking like a leaf when during the coronation, if it goes ahead as planned. And there's a big controversy even about the crown, as you know, that she would wear, because
Mm-hmm.
she's supposed to wear the Queen Mother's crown, but the Queen Mother hated Camilla. And there's a problem with the Kohinoor diamond, which is one of the most famous diamonds in the world, that's set right in the middle of the Queen Mother's crown. And India claims that it's worth $500 million. So, if she's crowned with the Queen Mother's crown, Camilla will be offending the biggest country, and the crown will be offending the biggest country in the Commonwealth, India. So that's
Yeah.
still very controversial.
We
Yeah.
actually talked about that on a recent episode. And so I'm just still sitting here thinking, what if I would have told you 25 years ago, as you were writing The Day Diana Died, or whatever book was going on
Yeah.
25 years ago, that this would all be happening? But I want to back up for a minute to Charles's childhood. So as a child, the king, you've touched on this already today, never really felt like he belonged. He has a delicate nature. But he also had a mother who was not good at showing affection, and a father who was just about as much of an alpha male as they come. So,
Right.
how did his childhood shape the man we see today?
Well, it made him this solitary, lonely uh, figure. I mean, you have this little boy who's really the only person or people he can turn to are really three people: the Queen Mother, who was a very affectionate grandmother and defended his sensitive side. Don't forget, as you said, the alpha male Philip saw this as weakness and really was very dismissive and even abusive toward Charles. Felt that he was a weakling. At one point, even as an adult, the Queen, when Charles got very emotional because one of his the young naval personnel who were under him when he was serving in the Navy briefly, this fellow was killed, and he was very emotional about it. And the Queen said, "Oh, really, dear, you must toughen up." So in the family, it was always thought of as a soft soul, and the Queen Mother defended this. She thought he was very sensitive and creative. Lord Mountbatten, who was his like surrogate father, but he really his great uncle, also supported him emotionally, and of course Mabel Andersen, his wonderful nanny, who is still alive, is I think she's the same age as the Queen. Was another emotional support. But outside of those three people, he really had to fend for himself, so he's a loner still to some extent. And I think, like you said in the very beginning, he's very conscious of the fact that his mother was deeply loved by the British people, and he doesn't know, and that Diana was as well. He doesn't know why people don't see his accomplishments, in the world of philanthropy and that sort of thing. Well, the reason they don't is because he doesn't have that kind of magic touch that Diana did. Very few people do, and his mother, of course, just by virtue of the fact that she was there and a kind of a rock for the British people for so long. I think that's why there was that affection for her. You mentioned 25 years ago. I can go back to 1977 when I went to I covered the Silver Jubilee, or marking the Queen's 25th anniversary on the throne.
Mhm.
And I was sitting right in the Westminster Abbey. For some reason, I'm against the royal enclosure there, and so very, very close to the royal family as they come down the aisle. And then, of course, it's before Diana. So sure, everyone was very impressed by the whole bunch. They were all there. But it was a kind of a waxworks feeling, a kind of a stuffiness to the royals at the time. I think it was only the injection of Diana into the picture and all the chaos surrounding the marriage that really, breathed kind of a new life into and Diana's personality, of course, breathed new life into the monarchy. So, but again, Charles is always the kind of the outsider, the person who isn't the focal point of everyone's affection, and he still feels he needs that, and he does need it to be king. He needs to win over the people in a very real way.
Well, going back to Camilla for a second, you touched on, she sort of saw herself in this mistress role with maybe not a desire to be queen. And I was stunned in the book to read that as a bachelorette, she once said, "I'm holding out for a king." So I'm curious, was Charles always in her sights from the beginning?
Oh gosh, yes. As a matter of fact, Alice Keppel, her great grandmother, was Edward VII's mistress. So close to Edward that Queen Alexandra, when Edward VII was dying, Queen Alexandra called Alice Keppel to his bedside because she knew that was the woman the king really loved. This was a story that Camilla was told since early childhood. As early as 10 years old, I talked to schoolmates of hers who said she talked about it when she was a relatively young girl about with great pride, the idea of being the king's mistress. And that wonderful line that you just quoted, where she was all of her roommates when she was working for a brief time, all aristocratic young women. Don't forget, Camilla is the granddaughter of a baron, was born into that world. She was holding out for a king, and she meant it, but she didn't mean she was holding out for the throne. She didn't think she was going to become
Right.
queen. She would be content with being the mistress, and people don't realize that it was really Camilla who picked out, along with Lady Tryon, Kanga Tryon, who picked out Diana from the list of 10 young women they drew up as suitable, wives, potential wives for Charles.
Well, one of the biggest tragedies of Charles's life was in 1979 Lord Mountbatten was assassinated.
Right.
Just one of the most devastating events of the king's life. Can you
Mhm.
describe their relationship and the effect his death had on Charles?
Well, Philip, it's funny because Lord Mountbatten, of course, was kind of a father figure to Philip, who was raised as almost a feral royal, if you will. He had no real family. He was born into he was a prince of Denmark and Greece and all of that, but very problematic, his mother and father. So he was left to his own devices. And Lord Mountbatten, a great figure in British history, Mountbatten of Burma, hero of World War II, and all of that. But Mountbatten was a grandson of Queen Victoria as well. He became a mentor to Philip, and then when Philip kind of stepped aside, he didn't seem to have much interest in Charles, mentoring Charles. Lord Mountbatten stepped in. So when Mountbatten was assassinated, it was, and I remember seeing Mountbatten on Fifth Avenue in New York back just right before his death. And
Oh,
you
wow.
know, well, yeah, we were just walking out. What a figure! He's huge, and everyone very very legendary character from the World War II era, particularly, but and a imposing gentleman. But yes, I mean, it was as if he'd lost his own father. So that was a moment, and Diana, of course, recognized how uh, that Charles was grieving, and it was that moment when he first encountered her sitting on a bale of hay, and talking to her for one of their early meetings, that she expressed her um, understanding, and she could see the pain that he was going through, and that I think that did touch him. I think there was some emotional appeal there in the very beginning. She was in love with him, I think, from the very from the outset, and she wanted their marriage to work, but famously walking down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral, she looked over and she saw Camilla sitting there in her gray dress with her pillbox hat and veil, and Tom standing on the chair, her little son Tom Parker Bowles standing on the chair next to her, and Diana felt like she was a lamb to the slaughter. She saw that this was not going to work, that Camilla was very much there still in Charles's life. So very
Well,
complicated.
I want to talk about that for a second. It's difficult to discuss a biography of the king without mentioning Princess Diana. And although we know the love of his life was obviously Camilla, do you think there was ever a moment where Charles and Diana's marriage had a real fighting chance?
Well, there's that famous interview where, they said you're very much in love, and the whole world, he said, whatever love is, I mean, it's,
And that's the time I would have called off the engagement.
Right.
that's right, exactly, and the look on her face. But, I don't know that there was ever a chance because he was smitten with Camilla. When Camilla went off and married Andrew Parker Bowles, he was devastated,
Mhm.
and went through this period where he was with all sorts of women. I described this this polo playing friend of his, who, kind of lining up young girls for Charles. He was kind of at loose ends there for a while, um, and Camilla was no longer, really as available as emotionally and every other way as she would have liked, I suppose, as he would have liked. So yeah, he's always felt moments of abandonment, I think, and I think he feels that now very deeply because of Harry and Meghan. I mean, I think they've really he feels very betrayed by the situation there. The fact that he's receiving all this criticism from the Sussexes.
I have to say, so much ado has been made about Diana's panorama interview with Martin Bashir, but we can't forget that it was Charles who struck first on the TV wars, if you want to call it that. That was Diana's interview was in 1995. Charles appeared in 1994 with Jonathan Dimbleby in the documentary Charles, the Private Man, the Public Role. So, what effect did this have on Charles's reputation? This is the interview where he admits that he'd been unfaithful after,
Right.
what did he say? The marriage had irretrievably broken down, or something like that. So, what effect did the Dimbleby interview have on his reputation?
Oh, it was just devastating. I mean, it was a huge mistake, and for him, and of course, it really damaged his relationship with William and Harry. I mean, William was distraught, and Diana had to go and kind of explain to them that these things happen and try and calm them down. But William, I think one of the great ironies here is that it was always William who stood up to Charles as a boy and even as a teenager. And why are you making Mummy cry? At one point he said, Charles just said he never loved Diana, very publicly, and William, said, "I hate you, Daddy. Or Papa, I hate you." And now, fast forward 20 years, and he's probably the strongest supporter and ally of Charles, because they both, of course, have the monarchy that they have to support and preserve for William in the future. But yeah, that was a very big mistake. And by the way, however it was obtained, we have to remember the Bashir interview. And there was all sorts of inexcusable behavior on the part of the journalists in getting that, landing that interview. The substance of it is true. What she was doing was telling the world what had happened, in a very, I think, a very honest way. So that was a landmark interview in that regard. Can't dismiss what was said during the interview, and the efforts to never broadcast it again are a big mistake, I think, because it really offers a window into the whole situation there. It's part of history.
Well, I was shocked to learn that Charles was almost in what could have been a deadly car accident right before Diana's own fatal crash.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, not only that, I mean, in the book, I do describe the number of times he cheated death, I mean, relatively recently, Charles revealed that when he was a student at Trinity College and Cambridge University, he was riding his bicycle and was struck by a bus and just felt like the hand of God somehow, saved him. He has no idea how he survived, he said. At one point, when he was doing parachute training, in the RAF, because the future monarch always goes through all the various services, his feet got tangled in the lines of his parachute, and he was upside down, and he only righted himself at the last minute. If he had been killed in either one of those instances, we'd be talking about King Andrew. I mean, that's the kind of twist of fate.
Wow. Yeah.
That changes everything. And later on, there was an assassination attempt. A man jumped on stage and fired a gun in Australia. That was in the 90s. He just 2 weeks before Diane. Oh, and he's almost killed in an avalanche.
Yep.
That killed his friend Hugh Lindsay. And then just 2 weeks before Diana died, his car, went out of control in Mallorca, Spain, and almost went over a cliff. So it could have been Charles who was killed in a car crash within, as I said, 2 weeks of Diana's death. And I also write about the hit. Well, I don't want to say hit and run, but it kind of is the accident that Camilla was involved in, a car accident in which somebody was. That could have also been a catastrophe. But again, a lot goes on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of.
Yeah. Listeners, when we said the book was revelatory, we meant it. And so here's a couple of quick facts that I learned from the book. Well, I kind of knew some of them, but that were reinforced in the book. Charles is a workhorse. As you mentioned earlier, he has a volatile temper. He has a bit of an Eeyore disposition. He had a crush on Barbara Streisand. Interesting. I learned so much from this book, but in addition to the Camilla Queen Consort, Prince Andrew payoff, quid pro quo deal, I was kind of honestly shocked to learn that in the book, it was revealed, at least in the beginning, Camilla was not a big fan of the then Kate Middleton's, which shocks me because I feel like Kate is so universally loved. They obviously seem to get along fine now, but what was behind that?
Well, you've got to remember that, Camilla, for all of her earthiness and loving country life and fox hunting and gardening and all that stuff, she is an aristocrat. She is a bit of a snob. I mean, if she's going to be the mistress of the king, everybody else, had better fall into their place historically. The king's wife, the future queen, must then be someone of position. And Kate Middleton, she's a true commoner. I mean, she's descended from, her forebears were coal miners. Her mother lived in public housing. They lived in public housing for a while. Her mother was a flight attendant, famously self-made woman, and Carol Middleton. And but she's not the kind of person that would have been suitable, quote unquote, in Camilla's eyes for a future queen. And so, she whispered in Charles's ear at one point. And I tell you, I was in London at the time. And of course, uh, Kate and this is in 2007, Kate and William had been together for years. It was only a matter of time before, any minute now, we all expected them to announce their engagement. And
Mm-hmm.
boom, they split. And nobody could figure out. It was this earth shattering moment there, I remember. Uh, I actually had to update a book at the last minute uh, to take that into account. But it was because she had whispered into Charles's ear, Camilla had, that maybe he ought to suggest to William that either he break up or propose. And of course, William chose to break up at that moment. And they got back together within 2 weeks because Kate was so savvy about how to lure him back. She just
Mm-hmm.
went out there and lived her life and dated other people and was having a wonderful time. And William couldn't stand it. So, but I agree with you totally that Kate is fabulous. She's the best person for that job and that family, and I think she'll do a remarkable job when she becomes queen.
I
Well,
agree.
speaking of family members getting along, as the expert here, how is the relationship between Charles and both of his sons today?
Well, William, of course, is they're very strong bonds still. There's no problem there, but Harry remains this ticking time bomb, and I think when you look at how Charles and the royal family embraced Meghan Markle and Charles in particular, I mean, he walked her down the aisle, I believe the second half of the aisle anyway, when she got married to Harry. Meghan was close to the Queen at one early on. I remember the wonderful train trip they took to northwest England. They were laughing and smiling, and getting along famously. Uh, Charles befriended Doria Raglan, Meghan's mom. So all of a sudden, we have this, guy jumping ship and, in essence, kind of making these accusations about racism within the family. I think there's a strong sense of betrayal. It really plays to Charles's sense of being a victim, as you said, the Eeyore thing. Why are they doing this? Why is he doing this to me? And Charles did extend some branches, olive branches, over the past year or so, but I would say right now the relationship is at an all-time low. There was a chance during the Queen's funeral for everyone to bury the hatchet, but that did not happen. And you could see it hadn't happened from the looks on Harry's and Meghan's faces during the whole episode. I was really shocked, by the way, that in the beginning of the funeral, during the various ceremonies toward the beginning of the funeral, Harry was not allowed to wear his uniform, as you probably noted. Andrew was, Edward was, who's never been in the military. I mean, if anybody in that family deserves to wear a military uniform, it's Harry, because he's served for 10 years in the army and in combat in Afghanistan. Um, Eventually, Harry was allowed to wear his uniform for that vigil of the grandchildren around the
Mm-hmm.
Queen's coffin. But it was obviously there was some, consternation on Harry's part in the very beginning, and they always looked as if they were shunted aside. There was no connection between the Sussexes and the Cambridges that I could see. So right now it's pretty bad, and I just think it's going to get worse. The relationship between Charles and William on the one hand, and Harry and Meghan on the other.
Well, our last question for you, again, we could talk to you forever. This book is so good. And it closes with Charles knows better than anyone that his reign will not be a long one.
Mm-hmm.
Bookended by the most admired and longest reigning monarch in history and a dashing young prince who is heir to the mystique of a martyred princess. I really love that turn of phrase. Charles can hope only to win the people's affection with his particular brand of quiet dignity, old world charm, and new world activism. So we're 2 months into hopefully 10, 15-year reign, something like that, of King Charles III. What is your prediction for the reign of King Charles III?
Well, I think one mistake people make is to assume that he's going to be a placeholder for William, that he's going to just keep the throne warm, as it were. He's going to be an activist, as I wrote, and he's going to leave his mark on history. I mean, he just waited so long for this moment. Only Edward VII waited 59 years, but this guy Charles waited 70. Um, he I think is going to take the bull by the horns in terms of streamlining the monarchy. He's already talked about kind of redoing the way the monarchy is funded if he can. He's going to, I'm sure, express his opinions in private to the prime minister every week, which he has the right to do. Um, and I think he'll just, but unfortunately, he may be overwhelmed by scandal. I mean, he's got to find a way. The key to his reign is going to be winning the affection of his people. But that's hard to do when you have, a rebel prince in Montecito and princess, constantly making headlines and embarrassing revelations. So that's something he's going to have to handle. And also the reaction to Camilla. Camilla still is a very controversial figure. I think it will be some time before the British people really warm up to her in the way that that Charles would like. So we'll have to wait and see. Don't have to wait long though. I think Charles is going to start making waves very soon.
Well, The King, The Life of Charles III is out as of today, November 8th. Christopher, we love having you here. You are welcome back anytime. Anytime you write a book, consider it done. Thank you so
Great.
much for being here today.
Thank you. I can hardly wait for the third time's the charm. Do I get a blazer then?
We'll give you a blazer on 3. We'll call it a total blazer moment on 3. Thank you for being here.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Well, I learned so much during that interview, and we always enjoy having Christopher Andersen on the show. Thank you, Christopher, for joining us, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram at Podcast Royal, email us at hellopodcastroyal@gmail.com, and be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcast. We always welcome a kind review. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.